So Chainsaw Man is a very chaotic story, and its characters are equally a reflection of that. They're very identifiable, very extreme within their emotions, their personality, their character traits, the actions they take within specific events. Yet there is one character that stands equally along all of them, yet for all the wrong reasons, especially within an occupation that requires a different mindset, and that is none other than Kobeni. For me, I absolutely love and adore the different type of attention Kobeni brings to the story. Is because she stands out for all of the wrong reasons. She is quite easily the most human within the story. Think of Power, think of Denji, think of Aki, Himeno, Makima, all of these incredibly iconic people. And while you could argue the semantics of them being human or not, Kobeni on the surface quite easily towers over them all. The personality that she brings across, the anxiety, the intense emotion that she feels, and how it's portrayed through her character, through her physical appearance, is something that's so alluring to such a chaotic world. And Fujimoto goes above and beyond to make this clear, that this one character is kind of the perfect representation of humanity within a devil hunting occupation, one that is more human than murderer in this sense. Obviously this is blown out of proportion and it is very much an extreme, but it does a lot to get the point across, and it helps you balance very specific situations or scenarios or character interactions extremely well. So as much as she may be considered not necessarily the main cast but more of a side character, you could definitely argue between those points. The amount of impact or clash of conflict that she brings across is one of, if not the most vital importance that makes Chainsaw Man such a compelling read. If there was one character you would think could easily be killed off within the story, it would probably lean towards Kobeni. She doesn't really hinge on any narrative thread that needs to be played upon. She's not a main spotlighted character that is important for any character or story to move forward. She's definitely not the strongest nor the most confident within her devil hunting capabilities, so she could quite easily be killed, yet time and time again she manages to survive. And while the scale for this high class action and horror and chaoticness that blurs its way through Chainsaw Man's narrative, the Gun Devil, Katana Man, Makima, with all of the hybrids, she still manages to survive. She hangs on in every single way possible. Because of this, I personally give her a title. She is humanity's anxious warrior, maybe even humanity's greatest warrior. She's quite easily managed to survive the onslaught of the story that is being told, not only because of the anxiety that she has, not only because of the character that she is, but because of, once again, that clash of conflict or tones or atmospheres that she brings across. When you put her next to Denji, when you put her next to Power, she couples with them so perfectly, is because having human nature within Chainsaw Man is rather ironic. It's not something you see all too often, and it's very hard to pinpoint what characters genuinely feel normal or relatable, and out of every single one, a lot of people are going to lean towards her. You may not have the overly crippling anxiety that she has, or the thought process that she goes through where she can be very negative or down on herself or accuse people very quickly or just cracks underneath such an immense amount of pressure that she builds for herself. If anything, she is the worst type of person to be within this story. She's the worst type of person to be a devil hunter, yet funny enough, she does thrive. She does survive longer than a lot of other people, and still to this day, and most likely within part 2 as well, she's going to play more of an importance. I genuinely think Fujimoto has fun with detouring her character, putting her within these very high-staked situations, and her within the center of it all just makes it elevated, just brings this entire situation to a whole new realm, but makes it entirely unpredictable because of it. You do not know what is going to happen. And the best example of this is the hamburger / family restaurant scene. You see, this moment within the story isn't as impactful as it could be without everything prior. This moment does not work without everything prior. Kobeni is drip fed throughout the entirety of the narrative in so many different ways. So you get a very clear understanding of who she is as a character, how she acts within these specific events, and the lengths she goes through to either push through it herself with everyone around her or completely tuck tail and run away as best she can. However, there has also been times where this overwhelming anxiety doesn't get the better of her. Instead, it kind of gives birth to something else, a very competent, clear-minded, and overly focused side that we rarely see, because we don't know what her devil is. We don't know what type of contract she has. But every person that has ever talked about Kobeni, you take into consideration her age and the fact that she is on Makima's experimental squad, she's very proficient, she's powerful, she's strong, yet we rarely see it. You see in times where she's completely the opposite version of her personality and what she brings across. And I very much hope that we see this more within part 2, especially the reveal of the devil that she's contracted with. You see, I thought about what her devil could be quite a lot, and while you can easily spitball pretty much anything and connect it to her character, one that I always kind of lean back on rather comfortably is either something to do with anxiety or something that amplifies her emotional state. Think of it as like a pro and a con at the same time. This isn't necessarily to take away Kobeni's characteristic of her being extremely anxious and nervous all the time, but something that potentially the devil that she's contracted with feeds off. Something that enhances it quite drastically. But when she does need power, when she does need to be within this state of mind that is life or death and is able to switch between it, she is extremely powerful. She is clear cut. She is focused. When you think about the drastic jump between the two, it kind of makes the most sense, at least for now, in terms of where she comes from and what type of past she has and what devil she could be contracted with. It's very rare that you have people with such crippling anxiety that tend to overthink situations, just suddenly switch into the most focused and hypersensitive individuals that can get things done within such a chaotic moment unless there's some sort of reason for it. That in itself is just overthinking it. There's no real groundwork or any sort of cohesive ties that lead into that idea to make it more impactful or factual in any way, but it's one where you continuously think about it and it does lead down some very interesting avenues, especially with how she could be utilized within Chainsaw Man Part 2. I do want to go back to the hamburger scene and pretty much explain why this scene is probably one of my favorites, and for a lot of you probably your favorites as well, and how it only works because of how she's drip fed throughout the beginning of the story and all the way up to it. If you did not have a clear understanding of Kobeni's character prior to the hamburger family mart scene, it wouldn't work, or at least it wouldn't be as effective. That scene works so inherently well is because the amount of tension that comes with it and the overall clash of tones and atmospheres is so clear cut and intense. So you've built up this understanding towards Kobeni. You know that she is extremely anxious, she gets very nervous, she cripples under very high situations, but you also recognize that there is times where she becomes clear, where she becomes focused, when she becomes proactive and very dangerous and powerful. You know there's a bit of lingering strength underneath that we haven't seen before, and a lot of people talk about that power in a very respectful way, something that should technically be feared. So this moment is a make or break for her character. Are we going to see her crack completely and potentially die, which is definitely the extreme of one end, but something that is very much constantly within the story on whether or not she would die or not? Or is she going to step above and become proactive and potentially clash with Denji and the new Chainsaw Man form that he has taken? She does neither. If anything, she goes back to that Kobeni that we all fell in love with the very first time that we ever seen her. This very overly anxious person put in a position taken completely away from the devil hunting occupation. You see, at this point, Kobeni was no longer a devil hunter, but the reason she became one is because she wanted to provide for her siblings, for her family, and the two options, unfortunately, that she was giving herself is either becoming a devil hunter and potentially dying, which didn't really work for her personality because obviously she's extremely nervous and has anxiety, or become a prostitute. In the sense of Chainsaw Man's world, both probably equally as bad, but she chose devil hunting. After the midway point of Chainsaw Man, she ends up quitting. She's had enough, and she finds herself at a restaurant, and this is where she works, and you kind of get a very eerie and disgusting tone that comes from that family scene where she's being kind of emotionally and mentally abused by her co-workers, not to the most extreme degrees, but stuff that seems very subtle and low-key, and honestly honestly just creepy in nature. The way that whole scene kicks off, enough for her to ask for help, never set well with me. Not in the sense that I disliked it, but the fact that it just felt creepy. It felt very unsettling. Denji obviously comes to the rescue, but this is a brand new form. We don't know what this type of Denji is. We know he's very vicious. We know he doesn't really have any human comprehension. He's more animalistic and instinct driven. And just prior to this, we recognize that anybody asking for help would most likely be killed. So already we know that Kobeni is in a bad position. Yet Fujimoto once again completely subverts your expectation, and he plays the scene in the most humorous of ways possible that shouldn't actually be possible, which is impressive to say the least. If you gave the family burger scene to someone for them to read, borderline impossible to figure out what is going to happen. And even while they're continuously reading it, trying to gauge what's going to happen next, Fujimoto once again changes its course of direction. He weaponizes Kobeni's anxiety, her human side, and turns it into humor, turns it into comedy in one of the most uncomfortable and intense and suffocating moments or situations throughout the entirety of the story, the most unpredictable Denji we have ever witnessed, the most dangerous. And he nails it home perfectly. And Kobeni is the spotlight for it. She carries the narrative, she carries the emotion, the different tones, and it all funnels down into specific climatic points. They think something is about to snap. So her dropping the burger for the first time is like a climatic moment in itself. Think of it like the final fight between the main character and the big bad villain. It's almost structured the same way, but with a character that is more humorous in design than powerful. So she drops the burger on Denji and you think it's over. She's done, she's dead, she's gone, but she's not. And just to clarify that you really don't understand what's going on or you don't know what's going to happen next, Fujimoto does the exact same thing. She drops the burger again, literally right after she's already done it. It's within the same chapter. And at this point, you've kind of lost any sort of understanding of what's going to happen. This is like manipulating a peak or a climatic moment and stretching it out further than what was originally intended. Usually your peak is like a clash or like a final fight, but this is like the peak has already happened, so let's do it again just to clarify and confuse people on why it's happening again. It's for comedy's sake, and it works super effectively when you bleed it into what happens with the remaining of Kobeni and Denji's situation. They go on a pseudo little date, and you end it off with Kobeni dancing for her life, basically. But it's not something that's necessarily glossed over. It actually has a lot of detail into it, shown very proficiently. And the funniest thing about all of this is that as unsettling and weird and just confusing this whole situation is, not sure on whether or not Kobeni would live or not, it plays as a breathing period for what's to come. This very confusing arc that is kind of iconic for Chainsaw Man now is a breathing point to allow you to readjust to the story, to Denji's new form, to Kobeni, who's more human than arguably everyone else within the story. And then right after it, she doesn't get killed. She's still dancing when Denji leaves, and then you get the very massive climatic fight. So even where it's located, it technically shouldn't work, but it does very well. I think the best way to describe not only Kobeni's character, but also that family hamburger scene is that is Fujimoto's authenticity. That is his aesthetic. That is how he loves to write his characters and his world and his stories, is that he likes to contradict everything, but he weaponizes contradiction. It's not a bad thing, but he uses it as a way to confuse you, as a way to add this sense of unknown to the entire situation. Kobeni is a character that shouldn't be within this story, that shouldn't be a devil hunter, that does not have the mindset nor the emotions, yet she thrives within the world, yet she is the most safe within it. Technically, she has slithered and avoided some of the biggest, most climatic events throughout the entire narrative. And obviously we can say that comfortably because we've read the story. We know what she's been through, but you don't know that when you're reading. So that's kind of the beauty of her character, is that because she's so anxious, you don't know what's going to happen with her. She could easily be killed off. She's not that important, yet she's surprisingly rather powerful and gets really focused in certain situations. Do you see how so many things conflict to create such a beautiful individual? I think I've definitely harped on a little bit too much about Kobeni, but she is quite easily one of my favorite characters, and I couldn't be more excited to see the potential bigger role she plays within Chainsaw Man Part 2. We've seen the human nature and the somewhat caring or open-mindedness, thought process and emotion that she had towards Denji regarding the ending of the story. That was a side of her we haven't seen before, something very pure and questionable that links back into her past and how she feels about certain things. We need more of that, and I hope we actually get it. Fujimoto has quite easily hit the ball out of the park with Kobeni, and I couldn't be more excited to see what he does with her within the future. So with that being said, that is basically it. Let me know how you feel about Kobeni. Out of all the characters within Chainsaw Man, where does she sit on your top tier list? Is she within the top 5, top 10? Maybe you don't even appreciate her all too much, but there's a beauty that she has. There's a human quality that is non-existent within Chainsaw Man that she upholds herself. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I want to thank you all for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Drink plenty of water. New video every 3 days, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.